December 1991. The Plaza Hotel, New York City. Whitney Houston was scheduled to perform at what should have been a routine private wedding reception. 300 guests. Standard set list. Standard fee. But what happened that night became anything but standard. Because sitting at table 17, invisible among the celebration, was a couple named Michael and Rebecca Chun who had made a devastating decision. After 15 years of marriage, they were done. Rebecca had the divorce papers in her purse, and she planned to tell Michael that very night, right after Whitney's performance. But Whitney Houston noticed something that no one else saw. She saw the pain in Rebecca's eyes. She saw the distance between two people sitting side by side. And what Whitney did next, completely unplanned and entirely from the heart, didn't just save a marriage. It reminded everyone in that ballroom that music isn't just entertainment. Sometimes, it's medicine for the soul. If you're ready to discover the hidden moments that prove Whitney Houston was more than just a voice, she was a healer, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell because this story will show you the true power of paying attention to people who are silently breaking. Let's dive into the night Whitney Houston performed a miracle. To understand what happened that December night, you need to understand where Whitney Houston was in her life and career in 1991. She was at the absolute pinnacle of success. Her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at the Super Bowl earlier that year had become the definitive version of the national anthem. The Bodyguard was in pre-production, promising to make her a movie star. Her albums had sold over 70 million copies worldwide. But success came with a price that few people understood. Whitney's longtime friend and vocal coach, Gary Katona, later revealed that by late 1991, Whitney was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. She was emotionally drained from the constant pressure to be perfect, to represent her race with dignity, to never show weakness, to always be the role model that everyone expected. She told me she felt like she was performing even when she wasn't performing, Katona recalled. Like her whole life had become a stage, and she couldn't find a way off it. The private event at the Plaza was supposed to be a break from that pressure. No television cameras. No critics.
No massive expectations.
Just a wealthy family celebrating their daughter's wedding and willing to pay a substantial fee for Whitney to sing a few songs. Whitney's management had actually advised against taking the gig. You don't need the money, and private events are always complicated, her manager had argued. But Whitney insisted. She wanted to do something intimate, something that felt more personal than the massive stadium tours she'd been doing. She wanted to remember what it felt like to sing for people, not for an industry. The event was organized by the Morrison family, old money from Connecticut, whose daughter Christina was marrying her college sweetheart in a lavish ceremony that had cost over $2 million. The guest list included politicians, business executives, and several minor celebrities. But it also included ordinary family friends and distant relatives, people who would never normally be in the same room as Whitney Houston. Among those ordinary guests were Michael and Rebecca Chun. Michael was a mid-level accountant at a Manhattan firm. Rebecca was a high school English teacher. They had been married for 15 years and had 2 children, Jennifer aged 12 and David aged 9. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple.
Stable.
Professional. Devoted parents. But the truth was far more painful. Their marriage had been dying slowly for years, killed not by drama or infidelity, but by something far more common and insidious. They had simply stopped seeing each other. The daily grind of work, parenting, bills, and responsibilities had gradually eroded the connection that once bound them together. Conversations became logistics. Intimacy became obligation. Love became habit. And then habit became resentment. The final breaking point had come 3 weeks earlier during an argument about something trivial, whose turn it was to pick up David from soccer practice. The argument had escalated until Michael had said words he couldn't take back. "Sometimes I think we'd both be happier if we just admitted this isn't working anymore." Rebecca had agreed. The conversation that followed was devastatingly civil.
No screaming. No tears.
Just 2 exhausted people acknowledging that they had tried and failed. They had made a pact. They would wait until after the holidays to tell the children, but they would file for divorce in January. Rebecca had already consulted with a lawyer and had the initial paperwork prepared. The wedding invitation from Christina Morrison, Rebecca's college roommate, had arrived at an awkward time. They had RSVP'd yes months earlier, back when they were still trying to make things work. Canceling would raise questions they weren't ready to answer. So they decided to attend together one final public appearance as a married couple before everything fell apart. Rebecca had brought the divorce papers in her purse, planning to give them to Michael in the car ride home. A symbolic gesture that their performance of marriage was finally over. As they sat at table 17, surrounded by the joy and celebration of a wedding, the contrast was almost unbearable. They watched Christina and her new husband dance their first dance, both of them remembering their own wedding 15 years ago, when everything had seemed so full of promise. I kept thinking about how naive we were, Rebecca later recalled. How we thought love was enough. How we had no idea how hard marriage would actually be. Michael was thinking similar thoughts. We were sitting at a wedding, watching two people start the journey that was destroying us. It felt like watching someone walk into a burning building while we were trying to escape. Neither of them had any idea that Whitney Houston was about to change everything. Whitney took the stage at exactly 9:15 after dinner had been served and the formal toasts had been completed. She looked stunning in a simple but elegant black dress, her hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. She wanted the focus to be on the music, not the spectacle. The Plaza's ballroom fell silent as Whitney approached the microphone. 300 people held their breath, still amazed that they were about to hear one of the greatest voices in music history in such an intimate setting. "Good evening, everyone," Whitney said warmly. "Christina and James, congratulations on your beautiful wedding. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your special day." Whitney had planned a standard setlist for the evening. A few upbeat numbers to keep the energy high, a couple of ballads for the romantic moments, and ending with a crowd pleaser that would get everyone on the dance floor. She opened with "How Will I Know," which immediately energized the room. Guests were dancing in their seats, singing along, caught up in the pure joy of the moment. Michael and Rebecca sat at table 17, clapping politely, but not really connecting with the music. They were too trapped in their own private misery. But Whitney noticed them. From the stage, performers have a unique vantage point. They can see everything. The joyful faces, the bored expressions, the people checking their watches, the couples in love, and the couples in pain. Whitney's eyes swept across the ballroom during "How Will I Know," and something about the couple at table 17 caught her attention. They were sitting next to each other, but might as well have been miles apart. The woman, Rebecca, had tears on her face that she was trying to hide. The man, Michael, had the hollow expression of someone going through the motions of existence. Whitney had seen that look before in her own mirror during the difficult periods of her life. She recognized the specific pain of two people who had once loved each other but had somehow lost their way. After finishing "How Will I Know" to enthusiastic applause, Whitney moved into her planned setlist. She sang "Greatest Love of All," which had everyone swaying with their arms around each other. She performed "Saving All My Love for You," which had the newly married couple, Christina and James, dancing alone in the center of the floor. But throughout every song, Whitney kept glancing back at table 17. Something about that couple wouldn't let her go. During a brief break while her band adjusted for the next number, Whitney did something unprecedented. She walked off the stage and approached the wedding coordinator, a nervous young woman named Patricia who had been responsible for managing every detail of the evening. "I need to know something," Whitney said quietly. "That couple at table 17, the Asian couple sitting on the far left of the table. What's their story?" Patricia looked confused. "I don't know them personally. They're friends of the bride, I think."
Why?
"Just curious," Whitney replied. "Can you find out their names for me?" Patricia, eager to please Whitney Houston, quickly consulted her seating chart and guest list. "That's Michael and Rebecca Chen. They've been married for 15 years. Friends of Christina, from college. Is there a problem?" "No problem," Whitney said thoughtfully. "Just something I noticed." She returned to the stage, but her mind was already working. The planned setlist suddenly felt wrong. These songs were fine for a celebration, but they weren't what that couple at table 17 needed. They weren't what this moment required. Whitney made a decision that would change not just the evening, but the lives of everyone in that ballroom. She was about to go completely off script. Whitney returned to the microphone with a different energy. The audience could sense something had shifted, though they couldn't identify exactly what. "You know," Whitney began, her voice softer and more intimate than before. "When I was asked to perform here tonight, I prepared a set list of songs that I thought would be appropriate for a wedding. Happy songs, romantic songs, songs about new beginnings and forever love. The audience murmured in agreement, wondering where this was going. But standing here tonight, Whitney continued, looking out at all of you, I'm realizing that weddings aren't just about the couple getting married. They're about all of us. They're about every person in this room, and the relationships we're in, the relationships we've lost, and the relationships we're trying to save. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. This wasn't the typical wedding reception entertainment speech. This was something raw, more real. So, I'm going to do something different, Whitney said. I'm going to sing some songs that I didn't plan to sing. Songs about the truth of love. Not just the beginning part, but the hard part. The part where you have to choose to keep loving when love doesn't feel easy anymore. At table 17, Rebecca Chun felt her breath catch. It was as if Whitney was speaking directly to her, though that was impossible. How could this superstar possibly know what she was going through? Whitney's band looked confused, waiting for direction. She turned to her musical director and whispered something. He nodded, though he looked uncertain. What Whitney was about to do was risky. These weren't celebration songs. These were surgery songs. Songs that would cut deep before they could heal. She began with I'm Every Woman, but she didn't perform it the way people expected. Instead of the upbeat, confident version that made people want to dance, she slowed it down, made it tender and vulnerable. She sang it like a prayer, like a reminder of the strength that women carry even when they feel broken. Rebecca started crying openly now, not bothering to hide her tears. Other women in the audience were crying too, each of them connecting to something personal in Whitney's interpretation. But Whitney wasn't done. She moved directly into Didn't We Almost Have It All, one of her most emotionally devastating ballads. This was the song that would either save Michael and Rebecca Chun or confirm that their marriage was truly over. As Whitney sang the opening lines, "Remember when we held on in the rain," the words seemed to suspend time itself in the ballroom. Michael Chun, who had been sitting rigidly beside his wife, felt something crack open inside his chest. He remembered. He remembered their first apartment with a leaky roof. He remembered dancing with Rebecca in their tiny kitchen while rain pounded on the windows. He remembered when they were poor and struggling but somehow happy. When had they lost that? Didn't we almost have it all? Whitney sang, her voice carrying 15 years of Michael and Rebecca's history. When did we let it fall? Rebecca reached for a napkin to wipe her tears and accidentally knocked her purse off her lap. The contents spilled onto the floor, including the divorce papers she had brought. Michael saw them. The legal letterhead was unmistakable. He stared at those papers, then at his wife, then back at the papers. This was it. The proof that it was really over. But then Whitney sang the bridge, the part of the song that asks the question that changes everything. Where are those tender moments? Have they gone forever? Michael looked at Rebecca, really looked at her for the first time in months. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but he also saw something else. He saw the girl he had fallen in love with in college. The woman who had believed in him when he wanted to quit his CPA exam. The mother who had stayed up countless nights with their sick children. The partner who had carried so much weight for so long. And he realized that she wasn't his enemy. She was just as tired and lost as he was. Whitney's voice soared through the ballroom, pulling everyone into the emotional journey of the song. But for Michael and Rebecca Chun, this wasn't just a performance. It was a mirror being held up to their marriage. As the song reached its climax, Michael did something he hadn't done in over a year. He reached across the space between them and took Rebecca's hand. She startled at the touch, looking at him with surprise and confusion. Michael leaned close and whispered something that only she could hear. I don't want the answer to be no. I don't want us to be over. Rebecca's tears came harder now, but they were different tears. Michael continued, his own voice breaking. I know we're tired. I know we've hurt each other. But didn't we almost have it all? Can't we almost have it again? The song ended with Whitney holding the final note in a way that seemed to hang in the air long after the sound had faded. The ballroom erupted in applause, but it wasn't the enthusiastic clapping of entertainment appreciation. It was the reverent applause of people who had just witnessed something sacred. At table 17, Rebecca Chun was holding her husband's hand and crying on his shoulder, while the divorce papers lay scattered and forgotten on the floor beneath their feet. After the performance of Didn't We Almost Have It All, Whitney took a moment to address the audience again. Her eyes were glistening with emotion, and those who were close enough could see that she had been crying too. "I want to tell you something," Whitney said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "I've performed for millions of people. I've sung in stadiums, on television, at award shows. But you know what I've learned? The most important performances aren't always the biggest ones. Sometimes the most important performance is seeing someone who needs to be seen." The ballroom was completely silent. Every person was hanging on Whitney's words. "Earlier tonight," Whitney continued, "I noticed a couple in this room who looked like they were carrying a heavy weight. I don't know their story. I don't know what they're going through. But I could see pain. And I thought, what's the point of having this gift, this voice, if I don't use it to reach the people who need it most?" At table 17, Rebecca and Michael realized Whitney was talking about them. They looked up at the stage, and Whitney was looking directly at them with a gentle smile.
To that couple, Whitney said.
"And to everyone else in this room who's struggling, who feels like they've lost something they can't get back, I want you to know that it's not too late. It's never too late to choose love again." The applause that followed was different from any applause Whitney had received that night. It was the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it. Whitney performed 3 more songs that evening, but the energy had completely transformed. She sang "Run to You" as an anthem of redemption. She performed "One Moment in Time" as a reminder that change happens in small decisions. And she ended with the greatest love of all, but this time she dedicated it specifically to learning to love ourselves enough to also love each other. When Whitney finally left the stage at 11:30 that night, she had performed for over 2 hours, far longer than the contracted hours she was obligated to provide. She had poured everything she had into that ballroom, not for fame or recognition, but because she had seen 2 people who needed hope. Backstage, Patricia, the wedding coordinator, was overwhelmed. "That was incredible," she gushed. "You went so far beyond what we expected." Whitney smiled tiredly. "Sometimes the planned performance isn't what people need. Sometimes you have to pay attention and let the moment tell you what's required." As Whitney prepared to leave the Plaza Hotel that night, something unexpected happened. Michael and Rebecca Chun had asked to meet her. Whitney was in her dressing room, removing her stage makeup and preparing to head back to her hotel, when Patricia knocked on the door. "Miss Houston, there's a couple who would like to speak with you, if you have a moment. They said it's important." Whitney was exhausted, but something told her this was the couple from table 17. "Send them in," she said. Michael and Rebecca entered nervously, almost reverently. They were both still emotional, their eyes red from crying. Rebecca was clutching Michael's hand like a lifeline. "Miss Houston," Michael began, then stopped, overcome with emotion. "Please," Whitney said warmly. "Call me Whitney. And sit down. You both look like you've been through something." They sat on the small couch in the dressing room while Whitney pulled up a chair to face them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rebecca, with tremendous courage, said what they had come to say. "You saved our marriage tonight." Whitney's eyes widened. "Tell me what happened." The story poured out. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, the slow erosion of connection, the decision to divorce, the papers in Rebecca's purse, and then Whitney's performance, particularly Didn't We Almost Have It All, which had cracked open something they thought was permanently sealed. "I thought we were done," Rebecca said through tears. "I had convinced myself that we had tried everything and failed. But when you sang that song, I realized we hadn't tried everything. We hadn't tried really seeing each other again." Michael added, "You noticed us. Out of 300 people, you saw that we were hurting. And you sang to that pain instead of pretending it wasn't there. That changed everything." Whitney listened with tears streaming down her own face. She reached out and took both of their hands. "I'm going to tell you something that most people don't know about me," Whitney said quietly. "My marriage isn't perfect either. I struggle too. The difference between love surviving and love dying isn't whether you struggle. It's whether you remember why you chose each other in the first place." She looked at Michael. "Why did you choose her?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Because she made me believe I could be better than I thought I was." Whitney nodded, then turned to Rebecca. "Why did you choose him?" "Because he saw me," Rebecca whispered. "Really saw me. Not who I was supposed to be, but who I actually was. And he loved that person." Whitney smiled. "That's still true. You're both still those people. You've just forgotten temporarily because life is hard and exhausting and relentless. But the love that brought you together is still there. You just have to choose it again. The three of them sat in that dressing room for another hour. Whitney gave them advice drawn from her own struggles. She talked about the importance of small daily choices to show love even when you don't feel love. She talked about forgiving each other for being human and imperfect. She talked about fighting for your marriage instead of fighting with each other. Before they left, Whitney did one more thing. She took a piece of Plaza Hotel stationery and wrote down the lyrics to Didn't We Almost Have It All? At the bottom, she wrote, "For Michael and Rebecca. Remember this night. Remember that love is always a choice. Choose each other." Whitney Houston, December 1991. She also gave them her personal phone number, something she rarely did.
"If you ever need to talk," she said.
"If you're struggling and need someone to remind you why you're fighting, call me. I mean it." Michael and Rebecca left that dressing room, different people than they had entered. The divorce papers stayed in the trash, where Rebecca had thrown them. The marriage that was supposed to end that night was beginning again. The story of what happened at the Morrison wedding didn't stay secret for long. One of the guests was a reporter for the New York Times Society section, and while she didn't reveal Michael and Rebecca's names, she wrote a piece about Whitney Houston's extraordinary performance and how it had affected everyone in the room. Whitney Houston performs heart surgery at private wedding, the headline read. The article described how Whitney had deviated from her planned set list to address the reality that not everyone at a wedding is celebrating, and how her authenticity had created an unforgettable experience. The story went viral before viral was even a term people used. It was picked up by other newspapers, then magazines, then television entertainment shows. Everyone wanted to know more about this intimate performance where Whitney had shown a side of herself that the public rarely got to see. Whitney's management was initially concerned that the story would damage her image as a superstar. They worried that performing at private events and getting emotionally involved with guests made her seem less prestigious. But the public response was overwhelmingly positive. People loved seeing this human, compassionate side of Whitney Houston. Fan letters poured in by the thousands, many of them from people sharing their own relationship struggles and thanking Whitney for reminding them that troubled marriages could be saved. One letter came from a woman in Ohio who wrote, "My husband and I were separated and planning to divorce. We went to see your concert together as a kind of goodbye to our marriage. But when you sang Didn't We Almost Have It All, we both started crying and remembered why we fell in love. We're going to counseling now. Thank you for saving us." Another letter from a man in California said, "I played your version of I'm Every Woman for my wife after we had our worst fight ever. The next day, instead of calling lawyers, we called a marriage therapist. We're learning to see each other again." But the most profound impact was on Michael and Rebecca Chin themselves. True to their word, they fought for their marriage. They started couples counseling. They created new rituals of connection. Weekly date nights where they didn't talk about kids or bills. Morning coffee together before the chaos of the day began. Small touches and words of appreciation throughout the day. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. But they kept choosing each other, just like Whitney had encouraged. 3 years later, in 1994, Michael and Rebecca renewed their wedding vows in a small ceremony attended only by their children and closest family. They sent Whitney an invitation, not expecting her to come, but wanting her to know how much that night at the Plaza had meant. Whitney couldn't attend due to her touring schedule, but she sent a video message that was played at the ceremony. Michael and Rebecca, Whitney said in the video, her face warm with genuine joy. "I'm so proud of you both. You did the hard work. You made the daily choice to love each other even when it was difficult. That's the real miracle, not anything I did. I just held up a mirror. You're the ones who decided to look at your reflection and change." The video ended with Whitney singing Didn't We Almost Have It All, the song that had started their journey back to each other. As Michael and Rebecca shared their second first dance as husband and wife, their children Jennifer and David watched with understanding. Years later, when they were adults, their parents would tell them the whole story of how Whitney Houston had saved their family. The impact extended beyond just the Chens. Christina Morrison, the bride whose wedding reception it had been, later said that Whitney's performance changed how she approached her own marriage. Seeing someone care that much about strangers, seeing Whitney use her gift not just to entertain but to heal, It set a standard for how I wanted to live my life, Christina recalled. She taught us all that paying attention to people's pain is a form of love. The Plaza Hotel performance became one of Whitney Houston's favorite memories. In later interviews, she would often reference that night as a reminder of why she sang. I've won Grammys, sold millions of albums, performed for presidents and queens, Whitney told Oprah Winfrey in a 1993 interview. But the night that meant the most to me was singing at a wedding for 300 people, where I helped save a marriage that was falling apart. That's when I understood that music isn't about fame. It's about connection. It's about reaching into someone's heart and reminding them that they're not alone. Whitney's own marriage to Bobby Brown was famously tumultuous, which made her advice to Michael and Rebecca even more poignant. She was fighting her own battles while helping others fight theirs. Those close to Whitney said the Chin experience affected her deeply, reminding her during her darkest times that love was worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. Gary Katona, her vocal coach, later reflected on that period. Whitney carried a lot of pain in her life, but she also carried tremendous empathy. She could see other people's struggles because she understood struggle herself. That's why her voice had such power. It wasn't just technical skill. It was emotional truth. The story of that December night became part of Whitney's legend, not because of the technical perfection of her performance, but because of the human perfection of her compassion. She had seen two strangers in pain and had used the only tool she had, her voice, to reach them. Michael and Rebecca Chin stayed married. Their children grew up in a home where they witnessed their parents choosing love daily. Jennifer became a marriage and family therapist, inspired by her parents' story and Whitney's intervention. David became a music teacher, believing deeply in music's power to heal because he had seen it save his family. When Whitney Houston died in February 2012, Michael and Rebecca were among the thousands who mourned her loss. They attended a public memorial service in Los Angeles, wanting to pay their respects to the woman who had changed their lives. At the memorial, they met dozens of other people who had similar stories. People who had been touched by Whitney's kindness, her generosity, her ability to see them when they felt invisible. One woman told Rebecca, "Whitney performed at my daughter's hospital benefit. She stayed 3 extra hours visiting sick children after her contracted time was up. She just couldn't walk away when she saw someone who needed hope." A man shared, "I worked as a sound technician on one of her tours. My mother was dying, and Whitney found out. She called my mother every single day for 2 weeks until she passed away, singing to her over the phone." These weren't famous stories. These weren't publicized acts. These were the hidden moments that revealed who Whitney Houston really was behind the spotlight. In 2017, 5 years after Whitney's death, the documentary Whitney was released. Michael and Rebecca were interviewed for the film, finally sharing their story publicly for the first time. Their segment became one of the most powerful parts of the documentary, showing a side of Whitney that contradicted the tabloid narratives about her troubled life. She was so much more than her struggles, Rebecca said in the documentary, tears streaming down her face. She was a woman who paid attention, who cared about strangers, who used her gift to heal, not just to perform. Michael added, "Our marriage is 32 years old now. Our children are grown. We have grandchildren. And none of that would exist if Whitney Houston hadn't noticed 2 hurting people in a crowd of 300 and decided to sing to our pain. When we hold our grandchildren, I think about how Whitney's compassion created these lives. That's a legacy more powerful than any number of record sales." The documentary segment reignited interest in the story, and didn't we almost have it all experienced a resurgence on streaming platforms? Young people who hadn't been alive during Whitney's career discovered the song and its power. Couples began requesting it at their wedding renewals and anniversary celebrations. It became an anthem not of romantic beginnings, but of romantic persistence. The enduring power of choosing love again and again. Today, the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, where that transformative performance took place, has a small plaque that few people know about. It was installed quietly by the hotel management at Michael and Rebecca's request. It reads simply, "In this room, December 1991, Whitney Houston reminded us that the most important performances are the ones that heal." That night at the Plaza wasn't about technical perfection or entertainment value. It was about a woman with an extraordinary gift who chose to use that gift to see people who were invisible, to reach people who were unreachable, to save people who thought they were beyond saving. Whitney Houston sang to millions throughout her career. But that night, she sang for two. And in doing so, she showed us all that real power isn't measured by the size of your audience. It's measured by the depth of your compassion and your willingness to pay attention to the people right in front of you who are silently breaking. Michael and Rebecca Chen's marriage, now in its fourth decade, stands as a living testament to what's possible when someone cares enough to truly see us. And Whitney Houston's legacy, beyond all the awards and accolades, is that she saw people, really saw them. And she used her voice to remind them that they mattered, that their struggles were worth fighting through, and that love, real love, is always a choice worth making. In 2020, during the pandemic lockdowns, Michael and Rebecca Chen started a podcast called Choose Love Again, dedicated to helping couples rebuild troubled marriages. The first episode opens with Rebecca telling the story of that night at the Plaza Hotel and Whitney's intervention. The podcast has reached over 10 million listeners worldwide, helping countless couples rediscover their connection. Every episode ends the same way, with Rebecca saying, "Remember, it's never too late to choose love again." And then they play a clip of Whitney Houston singing "Didn't We Almost Have It All?" The song that saved their marriage continues to save others, rippling out into the world like a stone thrown into still water. Whitney's voice, preserved forever in recordings, still performs that surgery on hearts that need healing. Her legacy lives in every couple who chooses to stay, to fight, to remember why they began. That December night in 1991, Whitney Houston proved that sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is notice someone's pain and care enough to address it. She showed us that true artistry isn't just technical skill. It's the willingness to be present, to be vulnerable, and to use whatever gifts you have to make someone else's life a little more bearable. 300 people attended that wedding reception. But millions of people have now been touched by what happened there, because one woman decided that seeing two strangers' pain was more important than sticking to her planned set list. That's the real Whitney Houston. Not just the voice. The heart behind the voice. The woman who understood that the highest purpose of any gift is to give it away to someone who needs it. And we all need it. We all need someone to notice when we're breaking. We all need someone to sing to our pain instead of pretending it isn't there. We all need to be reminded that it's never too late to choose love again. Whitney Houston did that for Michael and Rebecca Chen on a cold December night in New York City. And through their story, she continues to do it for all of us.